Welcome back to the table. Ryan and I just played Oathsworn Into the Deepwood. In fact, we finally played Oathsworn Into the Deepwood. We've had this game for a little bit, but it is still, like, it was delivering in the last part of the year and into the first part of this year. They, of course, ran that campaign late last year.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people out there who got it and haven't gotten it yet, because it's going to be, probably another year before they get it?
Before they get all the, from the second campaign.
Yeah, from the second campaign.
Yeah, and this is one that we got in 2022, and we did our best of the year list, and a lot of people were like, well,
where's Oathsworn?
Yeah, where's Oathsworn?
It's my number one. Where did you guys have it on your list?
We just didn't get to it. Games that come out so late in the year, it's tough to get to. So,
not to mention, there's a lot of game here. This is a campaign game. We've talked about this recently. You've got this. We got Massive Darkness 2. Which is different, but still it can be a campaign game, and that's how we were wanting to approach it. Frosthaven delivered. So there's a lot of these games that are sort of on our, slate, if you will.
Our to play list?
Just to play.
I don't know.
That's a new show, Just to Play. Long story short, we did finally get this table, and we played all of Chapter 1, both the story and the encounter.
Right. So definitely, that is a large chunk of game. I mean, we played for probably about 3 to 4 hours in just that chapter. So the goal of this literally is to talk about our experience and what we thought of it after that one chapter. So we don't know what's coming. We don't know what's coming in future chapters that might change our feelings. So maybe we'll come back and talk about it. But
based on
how do you feel right now?
Yeah, well, I can tell you right now, I'm kind of intoxicated with the game. I really enjoyed what this game is doing. And I think it's different than a few other games that I think some people might compare this to. Like I mentioned, there's other big games where you're going through. This isn't really a dungeon crawl.
I
would say the encounter portion, at least what we encountered here, no pun intended, was more of a boss fight, like a Kingdom Death Monster sort of situation.
That's kind of how I would describe this game. Like Gloomhaven and Massive Darkness, while very different, can both kind of be put in that dungeon crawl box, whereas Gloomhaven Frosthaven is like a big sandbox adventure with multiple dungeons where you're going onto a world map. Yeah. This is a more succinct, directed boss battler where you're effectively playing through a choose-your-own-adventure story that culminates in a boss battle.
And the way those two things were connected, I thought, was really impressive. Again, I don't have a ton of experience with a ton of these types of games.
I've played a lot more than you have.
I know, so you have to keep me honest here. But when I played the story portion by myself just a couple days ago. But we played that again, but I let Ryan make all of the decisions. And I was absolutely blown away by how different it was today in the story portion of the game compared to when I did it. I was sitting here, so what do you want to do, Ryan? And he'd make the decision, and I was like, oh, I'm not sure if that's as good as the decision I made, or it turned out to be better. We found and discovered new things, and ultimately that story ended. I mean, it's always going to end in doing this encounter. Now, with that said, and we don't want to spoil too much, but I'll tell you right now, mild spoilers.
There will be some mild chapter 1
spoilers ahead, but if you haven't seen anything about the Brood Mother in this encounter, every piece of content out there
I was going to say, this is also the encounter they use in the rule book. They show, all these images are from the rule book.
So there's not much to be spoiled, but I don't want to spoil any of the details. But the end of my story, when I played by myself, was incredibly different. We were under the city with Ryan. I was up on the tower walls and stuff like that. And even leading right up to the moment of this encounter, in my story, I actually had an ally with me, which we didn't have going into this encounter.
But we did have a different ally that you had never found.
We did have a different ally that I'd never found, but that ally was specifically just for the remainder of the story portion, not
the encounter.
The encounter specifically.
So I do want to talk about that really quick to kind of just get into the flow of the game, because you do play through that story well before the encounter, and those stories can go anywhere from an hour, even maybe some of them are 2 hours.
Ours lasted about an hour.
And for the first chapter we played for about an hour, and that story, that narrative, I've got to say, honestly, it's very rich, it's very fulfilling, it's very well written.
Yeah, whether you read it or not. But
don't read it.
I recommend not reading it. We used the app.
It's so good.
And I think his name's James Cosmos, the voice actor that they hired to do all the voice work. If you're not familiar with him, I think he was the head of the Night Watch in Game of Thrones. amazing voice
No,
work.
it was great. It really
and it's
sold
really
it.
well written too.
Yeah.
There's a fair amount of listening. So I would say, like when I listen to it by myself, it's fine. It's like you're listening to a book on tape. I do wonder whether or not if 4 people around the table, those things could get a little long in the tooth for some types of people. But I loved it. It was really well written, really rich.
If you're playing this game and you know that it has that deep narrative component, you're probably here for the story.
Sure.
This is a game where you're here for the story and how that story branches out over the 21 chapters. This is not necessarily a game where you're making your own story. However, within each chapter, you are making decisions like David and I talked about that are going to bring you to different paths. I don't want to dwell too much on the narrative part.
Because we don't want to spoil too much of that. And it is part of why we love that so much.
But it is really good.
The experience
it was
discovery.
It was a good narrative.
With a lot of checks, too. And a lot of different types of checks that you have to make. Some of which had us doing things in private and then going, oh, why didn't you do this, Ryan? Or why didn't you do this, David?
Doing some votes, doing some skill checks. And skill checks in this game are very interesting.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that's actually happening during the narrative. You're uncovering items, some clues. And what I thought was very interesting was that some of the stuff you're listening to, some of the dialogue, is giving you just clues about maybe...
A little bit.
Yeah, about where you maybe should go next, or maybe some even like some hints about what's coming, or like tips to like prepare. And if you're listening closely, you're starting to put these pieces together and be like, oh, I think I kind of know where maybe this is going. But at least in chapter 1, it really felt like the encounter was like the climax to the story that we've been building. And it's like you're building up, you're getting these clues, you're following this mystery, and it's building and building and building. And then right when you turn the page to the climax, it's like, now go fight this giant battle.
Yeah,
and that felt really cool.
And it didn't telegraph exactly what this was going to be. Now, like I said,
No,
we're
not at all.
familiar with the game. We've seen videos. We're familiar with what Chapter 1 was all about. But if you're playing this for the first time blind, you really, up until the encounter begins, you have little idea of what you're in store for, even the type of creature you're in store for. In this case, it was a brood mother rat with a ton of minion rats. And the combat, so we've talked enough about the story. Some of the highlights of the combat, there's a lot of cool things going on here. First, there's dice and there's cards. And you can choose either to use. And some people might look at those and go, well, they're basically the same. And they are, but when you flip cards instead of a die, so if I flip a white card instead of rolling a die, I get this value. But there's a discard pile, and you can always look through that. Yeah. So if you've flipped over a lot of white cards and got a lot of the blanks out of the way, you know that the rest of that deck is rich with numbers, and you're going to want to use that maybe to your advantage, or vice versa. Maybe you've gotten a lot of numbers out of the way, so you know what? I'm just going to take my chances with the die. And on top of it all, you could actually, if you want, roll die and use cards.
Like split up your total pool.
Together, which it's kind of maybe a silly decision, but I like that concept.
Well, I like the whole concept of the way that these pools are being built, period. Whether you're going into combat, a skill test, or any kind of check that the game has you make, it's super wild in that you can literally roll or draw as many basic dice as you want. You could draw 10 cards or roll 10 dice to make your check. And you might think, well, if you're going to roll 10 dice, you're obviously going to hit it. But if you ever roll 2 blanks, it's an instant fail. So you're kind of not quite pushing your luck, but you are playing the probabilities. And like, I need a high number. I need a 6 here. So I'm going to try the dice go up to 2. There's some ways to score critical hits and some exploding dice. And so when you're building these pools out, you're really thinking about like, okay, every die I add increases my possibility of rolling 2 blanks and just losing the whole thing.
Exactly. And now I will correct Ryan. It's not necessarily an instant fail. And this is
that's true.
This is one of the other cool things about the combat system is there's all these tokens. There's reroll/redraw. It's the same token depending on what you're doing. There's redraw tokens. There are tokens that empower things. So when you use an Empower 3 token, it lets you take those. Say you're going to roll 3 white die. You could use the Empower token to change each of them to the next level die up, yellow. Or you could take one of them all the way up to a black die, which is going to have a lot higher value. So it gives you a lot of tokens that you can use to kind of mitigate and manipulate what happens with the dice on your turn that makes it feel just a lot more fun. Like you have a lot more control over what's going to happen than you would just chucking die and going, well, that was a miss.
Well, yeah, and that system of like being able to upgrade those dice and turn in all those tokens and use all those tokens feels so dynamic, but it also encourages another thing that I think this game does so well is that feeling of teamwork. Because the way that the turns work is you're just basically spending what they call anima, which is animus energy or action points or whatever you want to call it. You're spending that to either take basic actions or to play cards. And these cards are, they're going to do your attacks. They're going to do your all sorts of stuff. But
really
some
flavored
of them
things
are going to do like buffs where they improve your allies. And your turn is just playing a card or doing one of those basic actions, and then another player can go in any order as often as you want, and you can bounce between characters. So if David's ranger is setting up for a great shot, and I say, stop, hold on, my priest can give you some of those tokens if he goes first. Let the priest take the action, give you these tokens. Now you have more tokens to spend to power up your next move. That to me is very satisfying.
Yeah, I think that would also lead to a very satisfying solo experience because you're really looking, like Ryan said, all of the characters that you have, all your hero or the free company, as they say, they work together and you have maximum flexibility when you're choosing what you want to do. Now, you have to basically take your action. If you're going to play an ability card, you've got to play it and resolve it. I can't start a thing and then have someone jump in. But it gives you amazing amount of flexibility to go, okay, I did a couple things, and I could probably do another thing, but let's go over here and do this first, and then I'll come back to finish it. But once everyone's out of their animus and everyone's passed, then it's going to go on to the bad guys. And the bad guys is like a very good boss fight game where you have this boss creature, at least in Chapter 1, that has multiple hit point dice on this sort of little chart associated with them. And it's going to be flipping cards and doing a different sort of attack. And there's stages. There's like a stage 1, 2, and 3 deck that has different types of attacks. And as you do damage to it, some of those stages are going to go away so that in the final stage, it was pushed into a corner and it was doing some pretty nasty stuff, spitting acid clouds out and everything like that. Really dynamic system. And now with that said, I do want to get into the sort of who is this for, who's it not for. And I'm actually going to start with who it's not for when I bring up some of these things. The battle system in this has a lot going on. This is not a streamlined battle system that's anyone. We play games. We were referencing the rule book a lot, which is fine. But we were also then going to BGG, trying to confirm a few things. We were having to make some judgment calls that then we were trying to get confirmation on whether we were doing something just right in terms of, okay, when you move this, how is this exactly going to move? And they have a lot of really good rules in place. And I am convinced that once you get it under your belt, it's actually a very good and rewarding system of how the AI works. Because when we did have our sort of hands around it and we were making the Broodmother move, and not even that, but even just the minions move, it was like, oh, that's cool. They've given a lot of thought to the AI and how these minions move.
It's actually quite simple, but it feels complicated at first because you're really dealing with 3 things. Every encounter has like the actual boss, which I think is very neat because the boss has different body parts and each body part has its own HP and you can deal damage to the different body parts, and sometimes you'll get bonuses based on your positioning, but that's included. Then you have like a rules board that has all the special rules for the encounter, and some of those rules aren't maybe in the rule book, they're only on these cards. And then you have the decks that David referred to, and each of those decks is like the AI, and it goes step by step. I do like that they're numbered, so you at least know like this is clearly each step, and you go down those and you resolve all of those. So you're trying to like resolve the card, and then you have to remember the special abilities, and sometimes it references icons on this player board. So there is a lot going on. I could see first-time players, people that aren't familiar with this type of game, or people who aren't just huge gamers in general, maybe struggling a little bit with managing the monster AI.
Yeah.
At first, at least.
I would agree. So that's one side of who I think it's not for. The other person, and Ryan touched on this earlier, if you're looking for a sandbox experience, I don't think, and again, I'll caveat this by saying we've only played Chapter 1, but I don't get the sense that this is going to have a sandbox experience. When you play Chapter 1, you go to Chapter 2.
It's a controlled narrative.
I don't know that this is going to be you played Chapter 5 and then you jump to Chapter 12. I don't think that that's going to be the case. It is a controlled narrative. Now, I like that personally because you get to enjoy more of a story, a well-crafted story, than you would in a sandbox game. But if you're looking to make wild choices all throughout, this may not be it. With that said, and who it's for, more likely in this case, is someone who's looking for that, but on a smaller scale, because in that story portion of the game, like I said earlier, we felt like we could make wildly different decisions. Now, at the end of the day, we knew that it was going to lead to this. But even that, mine led to this in a slight, not only getting there differently, but the end result is that I would have started this slightly differently with an ally compared to what we did today. So it really definitely felt unique in how we got there.
Well, yeah, and again, that's my point of who this is for sure. People that want a game that's exploring or telling you a very rich, dynamic story. This felt like watching or being part of like a great TV show.
Yeah.
Like you feel like you just watched an episode of TV and you're like, wow, that ended with such an epic encounter. But like David said, you get there in different ways. And there may even be some different objectives based on some decisions you make. And you do collect keywords over time. So there are things from earlier chapters that will come back and it might ask you later, did you get this keyword in chapter 1? It opened up a branching path. A lot of these might have things to do with like objects you find or people you meet that maybe will, if you didn't meet this person in chapter 1, they won't appear in chapter 4 or whatever, as an example.
Yeah, I'm almost certain that will be the case. We can confirm 100% that in chapter 1, when I played the story mode, I did get a keyword. Today when we played it, we did not get any keyword. So I'd be very curious to see how that's going to impact things, because we're going to continue on with this. And in fact, we just played Oathsworn chapter 1. We might have another episode of Just Played where we just played a chapter 2 and chapter 3 and go on. But I definitely want to play this more. I knew I was going to like this. It was a big hurdle to jump into the rules and try to get my hands around it to feel comfortable with playing it. The story mode, much easier. Story mode was very easy, and the app pretty much leads you by your nose. The encounter, you definitely have to read the rule book. I definitely watch some videos, and I would have both at hand while you're playing the first encounter.
But once you get into the flow of the game, I mean, it's actually, it offers everything you'd want to see in a game like this. And if you are a fan of these kind of boss battler games where you're playing through, not necessarily a dungeon crawler where you're setting up a bunch of tiles and moving through rooms, but rather each encounter is played out on this giant mat with wildly different bosses, with wildly different abilities. Every encounter that you face is going to be wildly different. And your characters are progressing. You're getting better cards as you level up. You're getting better gear as you level up. So there's definitely that feeling of progression that I really like as well. And I mean, personally, I've played a lot of these games. And I might play only one chapter and then go, there's not anything here to hook me. I don't feel that need to just play chapter 2.
I want to play chapter 2 right now.
Looking at the new items I got and the new cards, and we didn't even really talk about how the battle flow system works and all the different like Euro-y mechanics that are in this game. Like, there's a lot going on here that's going to really satisfy Euro-y gamers or people that like combos. I mean, there's combos and synergies galore. But even after beating that boss, and I don't want to spoil it, but we got some pretty unique special items.
Yeah, we won't spoil it.
That are pretty cool.
The unique items you get after a chapter, at least in this chapter, were very rich in flavor and theme to what we just did, which was really, really cool, because that's going to make it such that for as long as he has this item X, which we won't show, he's going to remember, oh, I got that when I defeated that broodmother.
Right.
Like, and it's a memorable moment and an item that really triggers that memory, which is really cool. And like I said, I'll go so far as to promise that we'll do another episode of this for a future chapter, maybe not chapter 2, but
after
in
we
that,
get a few in and see how we feel about it.
We will touch on some of the other things like battle flow that we didn't talk about and some of the more robust mechanics while you're playing the game. But if you have any questions at all about chapter 1, and even some of those questions, we'll try to answer what we can down in the comments below. This has been Oathsworn, and we're definitely going to play more of this. Will we play the whole thing?
I don't know. I don't know. I'd like to see if it holds up, if it can keep driving you forward so that you really keep wanting to play the next one.
I am curious to answer those questions. I think I'll enjoy all the story modes. I'll be interested to see if the next encounter feels unique, and then the one after that feels more unique, or if it's just like, oh, it's a different type of big creature with a bunch of its minions.
I bet it's going to be wildly different.
I'm hoping it will.
I'm so excited to find out.
But let us know if you have any questions, and as always, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you next time.